Good morning, everybody. Let me make sure that this thing is on. Yeah, it looks like it's on. All right. So we are ready to start Joshua chapter 1 today. We had a few things left over that I didn't get to from the introductory class, but we will come to those as we come to them, mainly talking about the different themes of the book. We'll talk about those in more detail as we run across examples of them in the book. And we're going to run across a couple here in this first chapter, because it is going to kind of lay out the program for the whole book. It's going to tell us what the whole thing is about. So let's begin with the first 9 verses of chapter 1. After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua the son of Nun, Moses' assistant, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now therefore arise, go over this Jordan, you and all this people, into the land that I'm giving them, to the people of Israel. Every place that the sole of your foot will tread upon I have given to you, just as I promised to Moses. From the wilderness and this Lebanon, as far as the great river, the river Euphrates, all the land of the Hittites to the great sea, going down to the sun. Toward the going down of the sun shall be your territory. No man shall be able to stand before you all the days of your life. Just as I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will not leave you or forsake you. Be strong and courageous, for you shall cause this people to inherit the land that I swore to their fathers to give them. Only be strong and very courageous, being careful to do according to all the law of Moses my servant commanded you. Do not turn from it to the right hand or to the left, that you may have good success wherever you go. This book of the law shall not depart from your mouth, but you shall meditate on it day and night, that you may be careful to do according to all that is written in it. For then you will make your way prosperous, and then you will have good success. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be frightened, and do not be dismayed. For the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. So this very first section lays out the program of the book. The book is going to be about the conquest of the land, and it's going to be about the inheritance of the land. All right, so there's really 2 stages to it. Israel has to go in and drive out the people that are already living there, and then once they have freed up the land, they have to apportion it out fairly, according to God's plan, to the 12 tribes. And that's what this whole mission is about. I want us to begin with the title that is given to Moses at the beginning of the book. And Joshua picks up just exactly where the book of Deuteronomy left off. You remember in Deuteronomy 34, it's primarily about Moses' death. And in Joshua chapter 1, verse 1, Moses, we're reminded, is dead. In fact, we're reminded a couple of times. This happens after his death. Then the Lord says, Moses, my servant, is dead. What I want us to focus on is the title that Moses is given, Servant of the Lord. Now, we might think that this would be a really common title for people in the Old Testament. Somebody who serves the Lord, and your translation might have it in all caps, right, signifying that it's the holy name of God that's being used there. That name that was revealed to Moses in Exodus chapter 6. I was actually kind of surprised to discover that this title, Servant of the Lord, or Slave of the Lord, the Hebrew word is Eved, and it denotes somebody who is a slave. It's actually a pretty rare phrase in the Hebrew Bible. And it is mostly used of Moses. In fact, almost exclusively used of Moses. We'll see as we continue on, there will be a couple of other places where it's used of someone other than Moses. But this is only the second time in the Bible that Moses has been referred to as servant of the Lord. The first time was in Deuteronomy chapter 34, whenever we are told about his death All right, so if you go back, it should just be like a page back for you, or even on the same opening. Deuteronomy 34, verse 5. So Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab according to the word of the Lord. That is the first time that anybody in the Bible is called servant of the Lord. Now, from our Christian perspective, we see that this becomes a whole lot more common as you go further into the Bible. What does Paul always refer to himself as whenever he's writing his letters in the New Testament? Yeah, servant or slave of Jesus Christ. In fact, we could we could pick a letter at random, and I can almost guarantee that it will start with Paul referring to himself in that way. Let's see. I've not looked these up specifically ahead of time. Yeah, there it is, Romans 1:1. Paul, a slave of Christ Jesus. The Greek word there is doulos. Because of our sensibilities, I think a lot of our English translations render these words as servant. Whether we're talking about doulos in Greek or eved in Hebrew, but it denotes a slave. Paul is recognized as a slave of Christ. In fact, he recognizes himself as a slave of Christ, and he teaches us that we likewise are to be slaves of Christ. But when you look back in the Old Testament, we find that this title is much, much more exclusive. And in fact, a distinction is drawn between Moses and Joshua when you look back at Joshua chapter 1. After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua the son of Nun, Moses' assistant, Moses, my servant, is dead. Our English translations have done a good job of preserving this distinction that is there in the Hebrew. Joshua is referred to as Moses' misaret, which means like a minister or official. Someone that I read likened it to like a page or a squire. Right, that's the relationship that Joshua has with Moses. Moses, almost alone in the Hebrew Scriptures, gets to be called servant of the Lord. Joshua at this point is not called that. We've seen this name for Joshua before, by the way. He's introduced in this way when we first meet him back in Exodus 24:13. But this is meant to distinguish Moses and Joshua. Joshua is going to be filling Moses' shoes. Right? He's going to be leading Israel in place of Moses. But we're cued in at this point that Joshua is not on the same level as Moses. When Israel loses Moses, they have lost someone special whose shoes, well, it remains to be seen whether Moses' shoes can be filled or not. Right, we're cued in here at the beginning that that's still an open question, and it's something that's possibly in doubt. So this is one of the big questions of the book. Will Joshua be a worthy successor to Moses? And that's something that we can trace over the course of the book. Is Joshua going to be a worthy successor to Moses? We should note, by the way, that there's a similar distinction made later on in Israel's history between Elijah and Elisha. Right? I just thought it's interesting that you see these two primary pairs of figures in the Old Testament referred to basically in the same way. That Elijah is I think he at least refers to himself as an eved, a slave of the Lord. Whereas Elisha is referred to as his assistant. And it's the same Hebrew word, misraet. And by the way, there's probably, I think, a messianic reading to take out of this. Because you have those two pairs, Moses and Joshua, and Elijah and Elisha. And you kind of carry things forward into the New Testament. We are invited to make comparisons between Moses and Elijah and Jesus. Right? That's made explicit like on the Transfiguration on the mountain, in which Jesus is declared superior to Moses and Elijah. And the question then, and this is not, I don't know that it's dealt with explicitly in the New Testament, but it leaves open the question, well, who's the assistant of Jesus? Once Jesus has departed, who fills his shoes in a sense? Sorry, did you have something? Oh, okay, I thought you said something. No one because he's still alive. I think that's a good answer. Now, technically, Moses and Elijah are too, but we know Jesus is on a whole nother level. All right, so the major question of the book is Joshua going to be a worthy successor to Moses? The Lord, as he commissions Joshua, tells him, "Therefore arise, go over this Jordan, you and all this people, into the land that I'm giving them to the people of Israel. Every place that the sole of your foot will tread upon I have given to you, just as I promised to Moses." From the wilderness, I'll tell you what, we'll stop there for just a second. In the book of Joshua, the Lord is going to be fulfilling the land promise that he made to the patriarchs, and that Israel is aware of. And the Lord speaks of the land in two different ways, just in the two verses that we read. In verse 2, he refers to the land as in the process of being given. Go into the land that I am giving to them, to the people of Israel. But look at how he refers to it in the very next sentence in verse 3. Every place that the sole of your foot will tread upon I have given to you, just as I promised Moses. So I want you to consider this for a second. Has the promised land already been given to Israel? Yes, in what sense? Yes. All right. So it's the object of promise, and it's the promise that he delivered through Moses, and he has been fulfilling that promise by bringing Israel to the land. We've already seen a taste of it in the life of Moses, in that the eastern tribes have already conquered their territory. And we'll come to that more in just a minute. But that happens before the death of Moses. We're already getting some conquest. We have already seen God leading Israel to victory over the kings of Sihon and Og. The main sense in which the land has already been given to Israel is that God has promised it. Right? And that's something that the Scriptures, I think, consistently teach, that whenever God says something, it happens. And even if from our perspective it's something that's going to happen in the future, if God says it, it's as good as already done. So in that sense, the promised land has already been given to Israel. And yet God speaks of the land that he is giving them. And so in what sense has the land not yet been given to Israel? They haven't taken it yet. All right, and here I think we see something really important for our understanding the way God works in human history and the way that he works with, the way he works with us. Consider this question: who conquers the promised land? Is it God or Israel? Yeah, the answer is yes. Yeah. It's both of them. It's a false choice, right? If somebody was to say, oh, you can only pick one, it's a false choice. It's like asking who saved Noah, right? Was it God or the ark? Yeah. I mean, Do you think the ark would have saved Noah if it was against God's will? No, he'd have drowned like everybody else. Do you think God would have saved Noah if he didn't build the ark like he was commanded? No, he'd have drowned like everybody else. It took both of those things working in conjunction. All right, what we're going to see over the course of the book of Joshua is that the fulfillment of this promise, the conquering of the land, and the inheriting of the land requires what we call dual agency. Right? It relies primarily on God's promise. It also relies on Israel's obedience. And this, I think, sets us up to understand what the New Testament later has to say about the relationship between grace and our works, our obedience. Right? We can take this reading of Joshua straight the way forward to James chapter 2, right? And faith without works is dead. As we understand the gospel, how is one saved? Is it God's grace or our obedience in responding to his grace? The New Testament talks about both of those things, right? Peter, remember, says the words, baptism now saves you. Right? So we hear a lot from our denominational friends, about, particularly the Calvinist ones, about how it's by grace through faith alone. And that's like half the picture. I mean, it's the bigger half, it's the better half. But it goes back to these sorts of things that we see in the Old Testament. Again, would Noah have been saved without the ark? Would Israel have received the promised land without the conquest? We've seen the answer to that one, by the way, because this is Israel's second go-around with entering into the promised land. I mean, we've got the answer. You go back to the book of Numbers, and you ask that question, will Israel receive the promised land if they don't go in and conquer it? And the definitive answer is no. Because what happens to Israel when they refuse to go in and conquer the promised land? They all die. Not only do they not receive the thing that was promised to them, they lose their lives. And so if we come to questions like, well, is it really necessary to be baptized? Or is it necessary to obey? Is there any sort of place for human work in the scheme of salvation? Again, we can point back to these kinds of things. Because sometimes I think some of our friends draw too sharp a distinction between grace and works, a distinction that the Bible itself does not draw. We find over and over again that those things work in accordance with each other. All right, let's talk about the boundaries of the land. Actually, I need to pause and stop myself here. Any questions or comments up to this point? Wayne.
It's funny to me how that faith-only people will talk about having only faith, but you go to the Bible and you see lists like in Romans and Thessalonians where they list things to be done.
Yeah.
Like, if people
Apparently irrelevant lists, right?
they just kind of skip over that. That's not works. That's just, and then we talk about what about repentance? Is it necessary to repent of your sins? And they said, well, there's an additional thing you got to do other than just faith. So, it doesn't matter whether you talk about baptism or not. Don't even mention that. There's all kinds of things throughout the Bible.
Yes.
That proves everything they say.
Right. I mean, and it is I think maybe the shortest way to phrase it is God approaches us with that proverb in mind. You can lead a horse to water but can't make it drink. Right? And we want to be the horse that is made to drink. Or at least we want to pretend that sometimes. Excuse me. All right, so good comment. Let's talk now about the boundaries of this land. And I ought to have brought the map up here. The The land is described beginning in verse 4. From the wilderness and this Lebanon, as far as the great river, the river Euphrates, all the land of the Hittites to the great sea, and toward the going down of the sun, shall be your territory. All right, these boundaries might seem confusing at first because of the mention of the Euphrates. And if you've got a map in your Bible, you might want to have a quick peek at that. Because where is the Euphrates relative to Israel? Sorry? Yeah, it runs, well, mainly through Iraq, modern-day Iraq. So if you... yeah, way out to the east. All right, so... All right, you'll have to excuse my poor drawing here. All right, so let's say we've got the Mediterranean over here, and you've got roughly the area that's occupied by Israel. If we wanted to imagine, say, like we've got the Sea of Galilee right here, and we've got the Dead Sea right here, and the Jordan River here. The Euphrates is like way out over here by the Persian Gulf, and it runs up this direction, if you can make any sense of that at all. So here would be the Persian Gulf over here, the Mediterranean, the Dead Sea, Sea of Galilee. The Euphrates is way out this way. And so it almost, at least to modern ears, makes it sound like, what kind of land is God promising to Israel? It almost sounds to us like he's promising all of this to Israel. Have we ever seen God promise all of this land to Israel before? Including, what would be modern-day Iraq, and everything in between Israel and modern-day Iraq. We've never seen God promise that land to Israel. We've never seen God promise that land to Abraham. Remember, that's what this promise is based off of. That's part of how we know that God's not talking about way out over here, because this is where Abraham is from. If God was intending on promising this to Abraham, why did Abraham have to get up and move? He already lived there. If the promised land is meant to go all the way out here. Wayne?
Well, it also says, I know you're going there.
Yeah. Go for it.
It says, all the land of the Hittites, the great sea, goes down to the sun, shall be your territory. In other words, the Hittites are up there in Turkey.
Yes. Yeah.
So this is not talking about east.
It's aimed north, yes. And that is, I think that's precisely the way to think of it. The Hittite Empire, it's mainly based up in Anatolia, modern-day Turkey. In the Hebrew Bible, it is often used basically as a synonym for the land of Canaan. So we also should not think that God is promising them the area of modern-day Turkey. He is having them cast their gaze northward. He is talking about this region here. And as he's talking about, as he's laying out the boundaries, all right? Yes, yeah. So and also remember that we tend to draw a lot sharper borders than the ancients did. But the general, like the rough boundaries, are going to be from the wilderness. So like that's the southern boundary, the desert, up to Lebanon as far as the Euphrates. And this is what he's talking about. This part of the Euphrates right here is going to be roughly the area where he intends to kind of cut off the gift of the land. Israel's intended to conquer all the way up into here. Let's see. Yeah, all the land of the Hittites to the Great Sea. Now remember, at the time, Israel is encamped right here at the River Jordan, just opposite Jericho. They are about to enter in, so they are already at the eastern boundary, as it were. And he tells them they're going to conquer this Hittite land all the way from down here, all the way to up here, as far west as the sea. And so this kind of lays out the rough boundaries of Israel for us, or at least the rough boundaries of the promised land. Now, one thing that we can keep track of as we go through, and we'll see this especially when we get into that last half of the book, when they start divvying up the land, we're going to see how much Israel actually goes in and settles. Because remember, we've said it takes both of these things. It's not just God's promise, it is also Israel's faithfulness in pursuing that promise. And what we're going to see by the end of the book is they don't claim anywhere near the entirety of the promised land. And in fact, I'll just go ahead and spoil it for you. We don't see Israel look anywhere near this big until the reign of Solomon. And it's only at the height of Solomon's kingdom that Israel's border finally extends all the way up towards the Euphrates. And then what do we know happens after Solomon's reign? Splits. So the kingdom reaches its maximum allotment and then just immediately loses it.
Wasn't that where, I might be wrong about this, I'm not sure about this, but there was some place in there where it is written, and Israel conquered all the land that was promised to Israel was fulfilled, something along those lines.
I don't remember off the top of my head if it's stated explicitly that way. I'll have to look it up.
There's a little verse somewhere, and I forgot where it is. It was pointed out to me in a Judeo-Christian history class in college.
Yeah.
And that was one of the big deals, is that premillennials it hasn't been conquered. So this
Right. So we're still awaiting the day when Israel's going to
exactly.
conquer the whole promised land, and then that triggers all of the...
And so this
Yeah.
shows that it has been conquered, that's in the past.
Right, yeah, we are no longer looking for fulfillments to physical Israel. Yeah, and I'm sorry, say again? The last census was, what was it, a little over 600,000? Yes. So yeah, remember the census is just fighting men. Let's see, what chapter was it in? 26? Let me go back to Deuteronomy 26. I think, no, it's not 26. Where is it at? So the number that came out of Egypt was a little bit larger than the number that goes into the Promised Land. You're in the wilderness wandering, Israel shrinks just a little bit, but not a whole lot. They're close to the same number. And you know what? You would think we hadn't just studied the law of Moses not all that long ago. Oh, you know what? I'm thinking about the wrong book here. I need to get my head screwed on straight. It is in the book of Numbers. And where is that second census taken? It's Numbers 26. I had the number right. I had the book wrong. Yeah, Numbers 26:51. This was the list of the people of Israel, 601,730. Again, bearing in mind that those are men of military age. So you're probably looking at maybe a couple million. I mean, we kind of have to guesstimate. But that's probably about how many are going to enter into the land, minus the tribe of Reuben, the tribe of Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh. Because remember, they live east of the Jordan. So Reuben, and they're all numbered here in that chapter. Let's see, Manasseh, where's their number here? Yeah, Manasseh's 52,000. Gad was 40,000. Reuben, where's Reuben here? 43,000, close to 44,000. So all of those, half of Manasseh would have lived east of the Jordan. They wouldn't have gone in. So Good question. All right. So this shows us, again, just roughly where the borders are supposed to be. We'll see what Israel occupies by the end of the book. Any other questions or comments before we continue on here? All right. God's promise is, I will never leave you nor forsake you. That's his promise to Joshua, that he's going to be with him in leading this conquest and in leading the inheritance. I think we should read this messianically as looking forward to the reign of Christ. Remember, the name Joshua and the name Jesus in Greek are exactly the same name, Jesus. And so we're supposed to read Joshua messianically. What's the very last thing that Jesus says to the apostles in the Gospel of Matthew? Y'all remember? I will be with you always. Yep, even to the end of the age. We hear echoes of this promise to Joshua in that. At least I think we're supposed to. The thing that we most get out of this passage is the commandment to be strong and courageous. It's repeated 3 times in the Lord's instructions here. Verse 6, be strong and courageous, for you shall cause this people to inherit the land that I swore to their fathers to give them. Only be strong and very courageous, being careful to do according to all the law that Moses my servant commanded you. Do not turn from it to the right hand or to the left, that you may have good success wherever you go. This book of the law will not depart from your mouth, but you shall meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do according to all that is written in it. For then you will make your way prosperous, and then you will have good success. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be frightened, do not be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. All right, so it's repeated 3 times. That last time is just kind of a generic be strong and courageous. Don't be frightened, don't be dismayed. We could perhaps interpret this as referring specifically to the conquest. The first time that he says it, be strong and courageous, is referring to Joshua's role in causing the people to inherit the land. But what he spends the most time on is that second time that he says, be strong and very courageous. Right? He intensifies it. Be strong and very courageous. Particularly in regards to observing the law of Moses. All right, so when we're talking about being courageous, by the way, we're not talking necessarily about being brave, at least not just being brave. In what sense do you have to be brave to obey the law of Moses? Right? It's not really a bravery thing. It is a steadfastness thing, right? A fortitude thing, an endurance thing. That is the sense in which Joshua is told to be strong and courageous. Stick to it, especially, most of all, in observing the words commanded to Moses. And we should hear in this instruction an allusion back to Deuteronomy chapter 6, the Shema. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart, etc. You remember what the instruction says after that. It's almost word for word what the Lord tells to Joshua here. The book of the law shall not depart from your mouth, but you shall meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do according to all that is written in it. For then you will make your way prosperous, and then you will have good success. And so it's made explicit here, the fulfillment of this promise depends on Joshua's adherence to the law, and by extension, Israel's adherence to the law. And so that question, is Joshua going to be a suitable successor for Moses? It also includes this other question: what kind of people is Israel going to be? Are they going to be like their fathers? Or are they going to be different? Let's see. Any questions or comments up to this point? Wayne?
We just got through studying book of Hebrews.
Uh-huh.
Directly in contrast with them. When the writer of Hebrews is telling them, you're being cowardly, you're turning around, you're giving up, you're going
Yes.
And keep with the faith and stay with it. And that's exactly a direct contrast to what we have here.
I think that's an excellent observation because the Hebrew writer, more than anybody else in the New Testament, uses Joshua. In fact, Joshua is only referred to explicitly in the New Testament twice. And one of those is by the Hebrew writer. And it's a huge contrast. One of the big warnings that he makes in Hebrews 3 and Hebrews 4 is don't be like that wilderness generation, right? The generation that did not enter into the rest. And he also shows us how what Jesus offers is superior to what Moses offers because Joshua could not give them rest, at least not fully. All right, so we've got part of the answer to our questions already from the book of Hebrews. We should also note, and this will be the last thing that we say. This instruction, be strong and courageous, is going to be contrasted over and over again through the book of Joshua, over and against the pagans who already live in the land. What we are going to hear about them constantly is that they are in terror of Israel, that their hearts are melting. In fact, we're going to hear it almost immediately after this from Rahab in chapter 2. That's the response that she's going to give to the spies, that everybody in the land has heard about what the Lord is doing in Israel, and they're all terrified. Whereas Joshua and the rest of Israel are told to be strong and courageous. We should also hear echoes of this, by the way, in the repeated instruction over the course of the rest of the Bible. Do not be afraid. Right? God says that through the prophets all the time. The angels that appear to various prophets say that constantly. In fact, even you get into the New Testament, and those are some of the first words that we see Gabriel saying to Mary in Luke chapter 1. Be not afraid. All right, we're going to cut it off there and remind everyone to take a breather outside and give the auditorium a chance to cycle in some fresh air. Thank you so much for your questions and comments and your kind attention this morning.